Okay, so I'd like to welcome you to the final briefings of the capstone workshop in the Sustainability Management Program. My name is George Sarah-Nicolau. I'm a faculty advisor for a section of the capstone workshop this semester, and I also coordinate the course because it has several sections for the semester. If you're a guest here tonight, a special welcome to you. Thank you for coming. Let me tell you a little bit about the course. The capstone workshop takes the place of a master's thesis in our project. In this course, students work for real-world clients doing actual sustainability projects. And there are two objectives to doing this kind of course, doing this kind of work. One is to integrate the knowledge and skills that the students have been learning in the program and apply them in solving a sustainability problem. The second very important objective is that students get to practice project management and teamwork and communication and very, very rarely, I kid you not, very rarely, conflict resolution. That's an inside joke. So tonight you'll hear four 10-minute presentations. We will have a few minutes of question and answer. Please speak into the mic because tonight's session is being recorded. If you have cell phones, please turn them off. After each question and answer period, I will call a 5-minute break. You're welcome to continue having refreshments in the back, and then I will call you back for the next presentation. So our first presentation of the evening is on the development of a sustainability metric for a new type of farming, vertical farming, and Glenn Halperin is the presenter. Glenn.
Good evening. My name is Glenn Halperin. I'll be presenting on behalf of my capstone group today. Our project was the development of a sustainable certification for urban and vertical farming. So since we'll be talking about alternatives to traditional agriculture today, let's begin by looking at some of the pressures at the global food supply. First is population growth. In 2050, there will be about 9.7 billion people on the earth, 25% more than today. As you can see in this visual, urbanization is another challenge. By 2050, the number of people living in urban areas is expected to rise by more than 6 billion, and food needs to be transported from where it's grown to these cities and megacities. And when you add the factor of climate change onto urbanization and population growth, it's clear that the global food system is going to need to adapt. So traditional agriculture has a tremendous effect on the environment, whether it be the effect of pesticides on water quality, or the strain that irrigation places on our freshwater supply, or the emissions created by transporting food around the world. Again, this system is in need of change, and today we're going to be talking about one of those solutions. So, to address these pressures, one of the solutions is vertical farming. As opposed to traditional horizontal farming, vertical farming refers to the cultivation of plant life on vertically inclined surfaces, reducing footprint by stacking upwards instead of outwards. As you can see in this image, these farms are placed inside of existing buildings. They're enclosed, climate-controlled, and integrated with building systems. These facilities are located in urban and non-urban areas. This picture was actually taken in Brooklyn, New York, and is one of the probably about a dozen or so farms here in New York City. Now, from a sustainability perspective, there are many benefits to vertical farming. Most notably, it involves 70 to 95% less water, 90% less land, and plants have about 80% more yield. Now, these benefits can be attributed to optimized growing conditions and shelter from extreme weather events. So our client was the Association of Vertical Farming, or the AVF as I'll be referring to them. They're a New York City-based international nonprofit organization composed of 44 members, including individuals, companies, research institutions, and universities. Their mission is to foster the sustainable growth and development of the vertical farming movement through education and collaboration. Now, our challenge was to create a comprehensive certification framework that tracks the sustainable performance of vertical farming systems. So why is this important? Why did they ask us to do this? Based on the feedback from the farms and from the AVF, they wanted the recommendation to address three key things. First, farms currently do not have a standardized way of looking at their performance. 2, peer benchmarking has not been established within a sustainability context. And lastly, the goal of the certification is to accelerate the progress of the AVF's mission to foster sustainable growth. So if vertical farming is inherently more sustainable than traditional farming, it begs the question, why is the certification important? Well, since the industry is young, operational behavior can vary significantly among farms, and there are still plenty of opportunities to use resources inefficiently. In order for the AVF to deliver on its mission of long-term growth, it's important to establish standards where farms can capitalize on the benefits of a sustainable operation, as well as a favorable performance rating. Our initial approach to this challenge was to split apart into 2 teams. One team was tasked with looking at existing vertical farms, and the other team looked at existing certification schemes, either related to farms, buildings, or greenhouses. The vertical farms team derived some key metrics, which the certifications team then used to approach each system and extract the relevant parts of those those systems, and then basically the research was melded together into 9 key principles. So here are the 9 key principles that we found from our research that inform the sustainability of vertical farms. They range from health and safety to quality assurance to community relations. Now, collecting data on these metrics will give us a good idea of how these farms are performing, and after a large enough sample size, we can begin to set standards aimed at helping farms establish goals and perform more sustainably. Since the team studied existing certifications, a logical question was to decide whether the certification would work best as a standalone or adapt to supplement one of the existing systems that we studied. So to do this, we developed an analysis for fit that looked at all the certifications that we measured and scored them on 5 characteristics. First one is principal coverage, or are the key findings from our research in that certification. Criteria applicability, or looking at how applicable the certifications are to vertical farming. Scope, which looks at the number of criteria. Geography, whether certifications are better suited to different economies or regions. And inclusiveness, any limitations on certification. We then created an applicability score for each certification. Food Alliance's greenhouse and nursery certification scored the highest, and best option if the AVF wishes to pursue a partnership. Ultimately, the team found that no certification truly encompassed the interdisciplinary nature of vertical farming. Even though Food Alliance's greenhouse and nursery certification scored the highest on our analysis, it still didn't account for the interaction between agriculture and building systems. In addition, should the AVF wish to consider a partnership, it would severely limit the amount of control that they have over this new certification in a rapidly evolving industry. For these reasons, we recommend a standalone system to most appropriately align with the mission of the AVF. So in order to develop a standalone system, we needed to create a framework first. Let's go back to our 9 key principles. We found that they naturally aligned into 4 different categories: farm, product, system, and community. Most of the systems that we studied had a very similar type of framework. Across the 4 categories, we developed a comprehensive list of 50 total metrics used to measure farm performance. Each one of the metrics are directly related to the 9 key principles. To give you an idea of how we're recommending the certification look at an individual metric, let's take a closer look at one of our areas. For example, energy use under the energy and climate principle in the system category. So within most metrics, we're looking at 2 different types of information, either quantitative or qualitative data. For energy use, we're looking for information like an energy use intensity. For qualitative data, we're looking for something like an energy tracking process or details of system automation, for example, daylight responsive blinds. One thing that was clear after our interviews with the farms was that many farms did not collect data on basic metrics such as energy, water, or precise yield. And if they did collect this information, it was in an unstandardized format. For example, some farms would look at water use per plant, other farms would look at time spent per day watering. So without this crucial data, the AVF cannot set benchmarks. And without benchmarks, they can't establish any sort of performance scoring, which essentially is critical to the viability of the overall certification. Some key insights gathered from ongoing discussions with the AVF were in regards to the ability of farms to report on our recommended metrics. So, based on this feedback, our team does not feel it's realistic to introduce all 50 metrics within the first year of launching the certification. Instead, farms will provide a core set of metrics at the beginning with remaining metrics phased in. We recommend 3 phases, 1 phase per year. So phase 1 has 24 metrics, Again, looking at core metrics, an example of that might be an energy use intensity. Phase 2 has 16 metrics overall and has data slightly more complicated to collect, for example, annual waste or packaging. And phase 3 has only 10 metrics, might require some infrastructure investment to collect data on. An example of that might be water use or community education. So to provide farms with some sort of assessment from the outset, we recommend a simple scoring system based on the disclosure of data. At each phase, participating farms will be assigned a score based on how many of the metrics they're disclosing upon. Of the 50 metrics, 12 are mandatory for a farm to be eligible for a score. So here's a sample of just 5 metrics used to give a simplified representation of how a farm might be scored during the disclosure approach. Metrics are either mandatory or non-mandatory. We have mandatory metrics because they're either necessary in order to gather key performance data, like energy use intensity, or used to normalize other metrics, for example, growing medium. If a farm reports on the mandatory metrics, they'll be eligible for a score, which will be based on the total amount of metrics disclosed upon. As you can see in this example, Farm A reported on both mandatory metrics, and a few others got a rating of B with an 80% score, whereas Farm B did not report on both mandatory metrics and was ineligible for a score. So for a broader look at how the system will be implemented over time, here's an overview of how the certification will go from the beginning to the point of awarding performance certifications. This system relies on continuous feedback from member input and is modeled how after other certifications got their start. For example, Food Alliance, Fair Trade, LEED, and others. Now to give you some context with what we're suggesting here, LEED underwent a 5-year period of data collection before launching their pilot certification, and the final metrics of which were actually voted upon by the members themselves. So we just went over the data disclosure section, which composes the first section here. In years 4 and 5, we recommend that the AVF institute benchmarking, calibration, and ultimately performance-based certification in year 6. So let's take our previous example of energy. For years 1 through 3, we'll be collecting energy use intensity values. For year 3, the AVF will establish a benchmark based on data from those first 3 years. Let's say an energy intensity value of 30. In years 4 and 5, the AVF will review performance against that benchmark and establish whether an EUI of 30 is representative of a standard or not, and adjust as necessary. In year 6, the AVF can launch a performance-based scoring system. So based on our research with guidance from the AVF and their members and following in the footsteps of other successful certifications, we believe that our recommendation can help the AVF set standardized data sets, establish sustainability benchmarks, and catalyze sustainability growth within their new industry. Thank you.
Okay, questions for Glenn?
So did I understand you correctly that you're going to try to give the farms a score now based on whatever data they have collected?
Yeah, that's the idea. We wanted to assign them a score from the outset so they can basically understand how they're performing relative to other farms and give them something to aspire to, a good rating.
Michael.
What were the successful crops that were being grown, generally speaking?
Sure. So the most common crops being grown are leafy greens, so the gamut of lettuces and chard, kale, that type of thing. Herbs are another one. Often plants that you can employ the cut and come again policy, where basically, once you harvest them, they still have more time to produce produce. So unlike tomatoes, where you pluck the tomato and then the plant's dead, you want some produce that you can continually harvest. So we found that those are the most common types of crops.
So Glenn, I have a question. Traditional farming, not that I know very much about it, is dependent on the weather. In these vertical farming facilities, the weather, I would guess, is not a great factor, except in extreme cases, right, where there are blackouts, or perhaps if there are heat waves and the cooling or heating system is stressed.
Yeah.
I'm wondering then if resilience in an urban setting is part of your metric system.
At this point, it is not part of the system, and that's not something we looked too closely into, but that's an interesting point, and yeah.
Okay, one last question there, Christine. Hold on for the mic. Hold on for the mic.
Is there demand for such a certification system within the vertical farming community? Like, is this something that the growers want?
Yeah, definitely. So within our research, we interviewed a dozen or so farms, and almost all of them agreed that this is something that they'd like to take a part of and they see the importance of. And the AVF has a great network that they can utilize for getting feedback and moving the certification forward.
Okay, great job. Thank you. So one noteworthy thing to add to this project presentation is that it was generated by an alum of the Sustainability Management Program who works for a vertical farming company and is very active in the Association for Vertical Farming, and that's Henry Gordon-Smith, and welcome back, Henry. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break, and I'll call you back for the second presentation.